Welcome to Conversations at the Crossroads, the podcast where spirituality meets the beautifully messy experience of being human. I'm Jenny, a tarot reader, Reiki practitioner, witch, mentor, hairstylist, and the voice behind Conversations at the Crossroads. Each week, we gather here at the Crossroads to explore spirituality, personal growth, and tools to help us navigate an ever-evolving human journey. Some conversations will dive into the mystical, others into the practical, and sometimes we'll just sit together through the hard stuff. Along the way, we may explore ideas that challenge us, stories that shift our perspective, or practices that will help us walk our path with a little more intention. So, wherever you're listening from, take a deep breath, settle in, and join me on the crossroads. Welcome back to the Crossroads. This week, we're going to talk some astrology, and we're going to talk about summer solstice and how the two things right now are playing out together in a landscape that is calling for such a beautiful moment of transition and transformation. So this week, the sky is doing something it hasn't done since 1983. And it's happening at the exact same weekend as the longest day of the year. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't really think much is a coincidence these days, but if you've been feeling something shift lately, if something old finally feels like it's releasing, or if you've been asking yourself, like, what does this all mean? This episode is for you. The summer solstice this year falls on Sunday, June 21st, 2026. It's the longest day of light in the Northern Hemisphere. Astronomically, it's the single moment when the sun reaches the northernmost point. After this, the day begins to shorten again. The Latin root of the word solstice is sol sistere. The sun stands still. For 3 days around the solstice, the sun appears to pause before it turns back. That pause is a spiritual invitation. It's not time to rush, it's time to receive. In astrology, the solstice marks the sun entry into Cancer, the sign of home, emotional roots, nurturing, intuition, and ancestral memory. We leave Gemini's fast-talking, mentally scattered energy behind and move into something softer, something more inward. Cancer asks us, where's your home? Who do you belong to? What are you protecting? And is that protection coming from love or from fear? The solstice is the sky at its fullest. It's the peak of light. And paradoxically, it's also the moment things begin to turn. The fullness contains the turning. It's worth sitting with. In the pagan traditions, the summer solstice is known as Litha, one of the 8 Sabbats of the Wheel of the Year. The name itself comes from Anglo-Saxon origins, and it was referenced by the historian Bede. He calls the months surrounding solstice before Litha and after Litha. In some Celtic and Irish traditions, it's called Alban Hevin, meaning light of summer. Litha is not just a holiday, it's a turning point. It sits at the peak of the wheel, the moment when light is at its absolute fullest, and it carries paradox built right into its heart. This is the longest day and the day the light begins to slow and return towards darkness. The fullness contains the ending. The peak already holds the descent. That is ancient wisdom dressed in sunlight. In many traditions, Litha marks the mythological battle between 2 sacred kings, the Oak King, who has ruled since the winter solstice, presiding over the waxing year, all growth and expansion and light. And he meets the Holly King at midsummer. The Holly King rises. The Oak King falls. And from this moment forward, the days begin to shorten. The year begins its slow surrender to the dark. This isn't tragedy, though. It's a cycle. Every fullness contains its own turning. And there's power in naming that and honoring what's ending inside the peak rather than being blindsided by it. Humans have been celebrating the summer solstice for at least 10,000 years. Cultures across the world, Celtic, Norse, Slavic, Greco-Roman, all recognized this moment as sacred. For the Celts, it was time to honor the sun god Bel, with massive bonfires lit to boost the sun's strength for the growing season. Fire symbolized protection, fertility, and prosperity. In Norse traditions, midsummer, called Jasnak or Sancthans, was communal celebration, bonfires, and honoring the shining god Balder at his fullest before his mythological fall, an echo of that same peak before descent. In Slavic folklore, Kopala night around the solstice was a night of fire and water. Couples jumping bonfires for fertility and good fortune, maidens floating flower garlands down the river. And in Greco-Roman tradition, the solstice was Apollo at his most powerful, a time when divination and prophecy were considered especially potent. When Christianity spread through Europe, solstice celebrations weren't abolished, they were absorbed. The church rebranded many midsummer traditions into St. John's Day on June 24th, honoring John the Baptist. The bonfires kept burning. The celebrations continued, just with new names layered over ancient bones. Spiritually, Litha is a moment to honor everything that has grown and blossomed since the darker months, to give gratitude for the abundance already present in your life, to set intentions for confidence, creativity, healing, and prosperity while solar energy is at its peak. It's a time to acknowledge what you're ready to release as the wheel begins its turn. Celebrate with community, with fire, with food, and with joy. The veil between worlds is said to thin at both solstices, making it a potent time to connect with spirit guides, ancestors, deity, and your own higher self. Some simple ways to mark the solstice are to greet the sunrise, to step outside at dawn, even if it's just for a few minutes, to face the sun and breathe. That can be enough. You can make sun water and fill a jar with clean water. I personally like to use spring water anytime I do something like this. Set it in direct sunlight from morning to noon. Use it to cleanse tools, to anoint candles, or add to a ritual bath. You can light a candle or a bonfire. Fire is the element of Litha. Even a single flame on your altar honors the day. You can gather or work with the herbs of the season. St. John's wort, lavender, mugwort, calendula, and chamomile are traditionally at their peak power when harvested in midsummer. You can make flower crowns, just like at Beltane. Flower crowns mark midsummer as well. And it's an old midsummer tradition, and it's still purely joyful. You can write what you're releasing and burn it. The solstice fire carries things out. Use it. And you can also have some seasonal snacks. Honey, elderberry, strawberries, fresh greens, mead. Let the meal be the ritual. Also happening this week, we're heading into a full moon in Capricorn on June 29th and Mercury retrograde in Cancer beginning June 29th. So this is very much a week of pause, reflection, and mid-year reckoning. Don't be surprised if the second half of the week feels slower, dreamier, more emotionally charged. That's the season asking you to receive rather than push. So before we get into the astrology of the moment, you have to know who Chiron is. Because Chiron is not just a planet. Well, technically it's classified as a minor planet, but it's a comet. But that's not what I mean. He is a myth, and the myth is the medicine. In Greek mythology, Chiron was a centaur, half human, half horse. But unlike the other centaurs, who were wild and chaotic, Chiron was wise and educated and deeply gifted. He was mentored by Apollo and Artemis themselves. He became the greatest healer, teacher, and mentor of his age. His students included Achilles, Asclepius, and Jason, the heroes of the ancient world. And yet, Chiron carried a wound that could never heal. He was accidentally struck by one of Hercules' poisoned arrows. And being immortal, he couldn't die. He couldn't escape it. He lived on in constant pain for the rest of his existence. Here's the thing that makes him different from every other archetype in astrology. He kept showing up anyway. He kept teaching. He kept healing others, even from inside his own wound. This is the essence of Chiron in astrology. The place in your chart where Chiron lives is the place where you carry something tender, something that keeps getting activated, a wound that is not supposed to kill you. It's a wound that, if you're willing to stop trying to escape it and start working with it instead, becomes the thing that makes you extraordinary at helping others. Chiron isn't here to hurt you. He's here to teach you. And the lesson is always the same. Your wound is your medicine. So what's Chiron been up to the past 8 years? Chiron's been in Aries. Since April 2018, Chiron has been transiting Aries. That is 8 years. For a lot of people listening to this, that's not a small slice of life. That is a chapter. Aries rules identity, the self, how you show up, the right to exist, to take up space, to assert yourself, to be seen. The wound of Chiron and Aries at its core is, am I allowed to be who I actually am? That question showed up differently for everyone. For some, it was, am I allowed to be angry? Am I allowed to want things for myself without guilt? Am I allowed to stand up for what I believe? For others, it was more existential. Do I even know who I am anymore? Chiron and Aries activated the wounds around independence and self-reliance. So the fear of needing people or the fear of not being needed. It activated wounds around identity and the quote-unquote right to be, whether you've earned the right to take up space. Courage and initiative, the wound around being the one who moves first, speaks first, risks first. The body and physical presence, the wound around how safe you feel being here in this form as yourself. Think about what has happened in your life since 2018. What cracked open? What identity did you shed? What version of yourself did you fight to protect and then eventually have to let go of? That wasn't random. That was Chiron doing his work. Chiron stationed direct on January 1st, 2026. Yes, literally New Year's Day, after a retrograde. This was an invitation. Live as someone who has already survived, already healed, already grown. Stop bracing for impact. Trust yourself. And now, June 19th, 2026, just 2 days before solstice, Chiron leaves Aries for the first time in 8 years. He is not finished. He will return to Aries one more time between September and April of 2027 for a final pass. But this is the first exhale. This is the first threshold crossing. On June 19th, 2 days before the solstice, Chiron enters Taurus for the first time since 1983. If you are under the age of 43, you have never experienced this in your adult life. If you're older, think back to the early 80s. Think about what was happening in the world and in you. This is a preview transit. Chiron will be in Taurus from June 19th until September 17th, and then retrograde back into Aries for the final pass, before fully entering Taurus in April 2027 for a 7-year transit until 2033. But this summer is the first taste, and it's happening on top of the solstice. That, to me, is significant. So what does Taurus rule? Taurus is the first earth sign. It rules the body, which is our physical home, our senses, our nervous system. It rules worth, what we believe we deserve, what we think we're worth, what we allow others to receive. Money and resources like security, abundance, financial safety. It rules values, the things that we live by, the things that we will not compromise. And pleasure and rest. It's our ability to be still, to enjoy, to not always be doing. Chiron in Taurus says, we have done the identity work. Now we heal our relationship to worth. Think about how many people walk around knowing who they are now. Maybe they did the shadow work, the therapy, the spiritual deepening, but they still don't believe they deserve the good things. They still feel guilty receiving. They still tell themselves that they'll rest when they've done enough, earned enough, proved enough. That is the Chiron and Taurus wound. And it's generational because Taurus also rules ancestral patterns. The wound around worth often isn't just ours. It was handed down. It was built into the family system. And now slowly, over the next 7 years, we get to rebuild safety from the inside out. It's not a quick fix energy. Taurus is a slow medicine, earth medicine. It unfolds in consistency, in devotion, in returning to the body, in the practice of receiving again and again until it no longer feels like a risk. Here is the Solstice plus Chiron and Taurus invitation. The work you did on who you are now gets to become the foundation for how you live. The healing moves from identity into embodiment. Okay, so now that we've laid the foundation, what solstice means, who Chiron is, and what this 8-year chapter has been asking of us, I want to bring it all home because astrology only really matters if it means something to you in your actual life. So let's look at where Chiron in Taurus is landing in your chart specifically. I'm going to go through all 12 signs. Read your rising sign first if you know it. That's going to be the most accurate. Sun sign works too. And if you have both, you can listen to both. Sometimes they're telling you the same thing from 2 different angles. But take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and trust where it lands. So, for an Aries rising, Chiron moves through your first house into your second house of money, worth, and self-value. 8 years of identity work. All of that now wants to show up in how you value yourself. The wound is believing your worth is conditional, that you have to earn it, that there's always a threshold that you haven't crossed yet. This summer asks, what would it feel like to believe you are enough right now? Watch where you undersell yourself, undercharge, or talk yourself out of what you actually want. Journaling prompt to go with this. Maybe ask yourself, where in your life do you act like your worth is negotiable? For a Taurus rising, Chiron is entering your first house, which means this transit is deeply personally about you, your body, your presence, your right to be here as you are. This is your Chiron return. If you were born between 1976 and 1983, the wound that's being touched is the core sense of self, worth as identity, whether it's simply safe to be. This is tender and important. Be gentle with yourself this summer and pay attention. This is a 7-year invitation to come home to yourself completely. If you need a journal prompt, maybe ask yourself, what parts of yourself have you been apologizing for or hiding? For a Gemini rising, Chiron moves into your 12th house, the realm of subconscious, the hidden, the spiritual. The wound here lives beneath the surface. It's the grief that you haven't named, the old story running quietly in the background, the part of yourself you've put in a box. This summer asks you to go into the quiet with intention. Alone time isn't isolation, it's excavation. Let what's been hidden begin to surface. For a journal prompt, you can ask yourself, what are you afraid to look at in yourself? What might be ready to be seen? Cancer rising, Chiron enters your 11th house of community, belonging, and the future. The wound is feeling like an outsider, like you don't quite fit, like you can be surrounded by people and still feel alone in a room. This summer begins a healing of your relationship to your people, your chosen family, your sense of place in the collective. Who are your people actually? And do you let them see you? As a journal prompt, you can ask yourself, where do you hold yourself at arm's length from connection? What would it take to let people closer? For a Leo rising, Chiron enters your 10th house, the house of career, legacy, public presence, and what you're known for. This wound is tied up in reputation, achievement, and visibility. What if people knew the real you, not the curated version? This summer asks whether your public life and private self are in alignment. There's healing available around your relationship to success, being seen, and whether you believe your work has value even when no one is watching. For a journal prompt, you can ask, what part of your work or legacy are you secretly afraid doesn't measure up? For a Virgo rising, Chiron enters your 9th house, the house of belief, meaning, expansion, and higher learning. The wound here is philosophical. Maybe you carry wounds from religion, from being told your beliefs were wrong, from your search for meaning feeling endless without a rival. This summer begins the healing of your relationship with faith. Not necessarily organized religion, but the trust that there is meaning behind your experience. You get to reclaim your own spiritual authority. Your journal prompt is, what do you actually believe? Where did you inherit beliefs that no longer serve you? For a Libra rising, Chiron enters your 8th house of depth, intimacy, shared resources, and transformation. The wound here is in merging with others, in being burned by financial agreements, by trust, by emotional oversharing that wasn't reciprocated. This summer begins healing your relationships to intimacy and surrender. Not the kind that costs you anything, but the kind that liberates you. Who do you actually trust? And what is causing you to keep your guard up? For a journal prompt, think, where has the fear of being hurt again kept you from intimacy or abundance? For a Scorpio rising, Chiron enters the 7th house of relationships, partnerships, and the mirror of the other. The wound here is in how you show up in a relationship or in what keeps getting reflected back to you through the people you attract. This summer invites healing around partnership, whether it's romantic, business, or otherwise. It's asking, do the dynamics you keep finding yourself in reflect the healing you've done or the wound that's still running the show? For a journal prompt, you can ask, what pattern in your relationships has been trying to get your attention? For Sagittarius rising, Chiron enters your 6th house of daily life, health, routine, and service. The wound here is in the body, in the nervous system, in the daily grind, in the way you push through instead of rest, in the chronic low-grade depletion that you've just gotten used to. This summer begins the healing of your relationship with physical self and daily rhythms. What does your body actually need? What would it mean to build a life around that answer? For a journal question, you could ask, what is your body trying to tell you that your mind keeps overriding? For a Capricorn rising, Chiron enters the 5th house of creativity, joy, play, and self-expression. The wound here is in your relationship to joy itself. Maybe you've had to be so responsible, so structured, so productive that you forgot how to just play. The summer asks you to let yourself be joyful without a reason, to create without needing it to be useful, to take up space just because it feels good. That is the medicine. Your journal prompt is, what do you love to do that you've been too serious to let yourself do lately? For Aquarius rising, Chiron enters your 4th house of home, roots, family, and inner foundation. This wound is in what was handed to you at the root level. The family system, the childhood conditioning, the inherited stories about safety and belonging. This summer begins a healing of the foundation that you were built on. You get to decide what stays and what gets rebuilt. What kind of home, internal and external, do you want to live in right now? For a journal prompt, you could ask, what did your family teach you about safety that you're ready to question? And for a Pisces rising, Chiron enters your 3rd house, the voice of communication, learning, and the local world around you. The wound is in your voice, in speaking up, speaking out, and in being heard. You've edited yourself for so long that you've forgotten what you actually sound like. This summer is inviting you back to your own expression. Your ideas matter. Your perspective is worth saying out loud. Whether it's a hard conversation, a creative project, or literally just speaking up more, the medicine is in the mouth. Don't make that dirty. That's not meant to be dirty. Your journal anchor is, what have you been wanting to say that you've kept swallowing down? So wherever you landed in these horoscopes, whether something clicked immediately or is settling in, I want to give you somewhere to take it, because information without reflection is just content, and that's not what we're here for. And I know sometimes listening to horoscopes, sometimes one lands like a gut punch, and sometimes you're just nodding along and kind of pondering over it, waiting for it to settle. And either is fine. But I don't want you to just walk away from the episode with that information. I want you to walk away with something to do with it. So as per usual, I have some more journal prompts and questions for the solstice weekend. And I really mean when I say don't feel like you need to rush these. The solstice is literally asking you to slow down. So let the questions breathe and journal or reflect, or journal with them or reflect on them. And again, if you're listening while you're driving, don't try to journal while driving. Just reflect quietly for yourself. Or maybe come back to these questions later. What identity did you let go of between 2018 and now? Who did you have to stop being in order to become who you are today? Where in your life does the healing feel complete, even if just for now? What did that healing cost you, and what did it give you? What would it mean to live as someone who already knows their worth? What would change tomorrow? The solstice is the longest day. What do you want to stand in the full light of? What do you want to be fully, visibly true about yourself right now? What are you being asked to rebuild? Not out of urgency or fear, but out of devotion to your own wholeness. We are at a threshold this week. 8 years of identity healing are beginning to complete. The solstice stands still, and Chiron, the great teacher, the wounded one, the one who never stopped showing up, is crossing into new territory. And so are you. You've done something. Maybe you don't have the full picture of what yet, but something in you has changed. Something knows things now that it didn't in 2018. Some part of you trusts itself a little bit more, takes up a little more space, apologizes a little less. That's the work. That's the medicine. And now the sky is asking, what do you do with it? Welcome to Chiron and Taurus, to Cancer season, to the longest day of the year. Welcome to the part where the healing moves into the body, into the earth, into how you actually live. That is the work, and you're doing it. Take that with you into this solstice weekend. And as you move through the week, be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself, and I can't wait to see you again on the crossroads. Bye!